when I sometimes when I sit before I teach, I wonder how to adopt or adapt what I was going to say to less and less time. And it's funny, I probably have had 4 months to prepare for this conversation because of, I've been teaching for a while last year and then had to have surgery. So I can identify with more, I suspect, with people who have illnesses that seem to be persistent and seem to mark our bodies with an expiration date. So it's in that sober moment. I've been spending time with a psychologist around this topic, probably more so because I, in October, became a patient and stopped being a doctor. And that experience was, if I hadn't, I guess, been burdened, so to speak, with a lot of discomfort or pain that required pain medicine, pain levels that are at a point where you have to navigate the world on pain medicine, and then experiencing some degree of increasing disability, I suspect. Part of that disability is in my mind, part of that's in my body, and part of that's in my spirit. So I apologize for being sober. I'm not laughing. Okay? And I apologize for that. Now, the good news is that Paul wrote a letter, and I sent you a note last Monday to see if you would kind of pick up on that letter, which was 1 Corinthians 2. And so I think if you want to, it might be good for you to stare at those words rather than stare at me. I did put some things on the board because I kind of note epiphany, and you can make sense out of it if you want to. We might get there, we may not. I apologize for the people who have to leave at 11:30 or 10:30. You might miss what we have to say. Knowing that we would probably get started late, I thought what I would do is start at the 12th verse of 1 Corinthians 2 and then work backwards up to verse 1. Okay? You do know that if you read the email that I was focused on fear. What did he say? Fear?
And trembling.
And there was one other thing. Weakness. Oh, yeah. So fear, weakness, and trembling. And I used a kind of a metaphor of Mike Corson and standing with Mike last week. And where's my other Mike? My Mike friend over here. He'd self-disclosed in the email that it was him on my left. And I was thinking, like, God, if he wasn't there, I might topple over,
Well, I would have too.
And so, yeah, and he mentioned that to me before, and I didn't want to say that, but, all right. So if you got verse 12 in your mind's eye, right, let's just unpack a pastoral letter, okay, from Paul. Now, there's a lot of other pastoral letters running around the world in the literature. And I think if we had time, which we don't, so I don't want your comments, of all the fun pastoral letters you've read and your opinions, your hot opinions about it. Rather, I would just like to talk about Paul's letter. And he says something in verse 12 that I think the destination of the lectionary for today kind of lands. It's like Apollo landing on the moon. we received the Spirit of God, and I'm parking on Spirit, okay? So we may know and understand, and verse 13 goes, speak, so we can actually speak about things given freely to us. All right. We back up verse 11. The Spirit of God knows God's thoughts. So the Spirit we receive knows God's thoughts. Verses 8 through 10 speak to me this way. The wisdom of God, not of man. The juxtaposition is not of the smart people. We'll get into medical in just a minute. Is observed. The wisdom of God is observed, is visible. It's not human level wisdom. Verse 7, we can know and speak this wisdom, God's wisdom, not foolishness from the period of time we happen to be living in. And it was predestined that we know it. What a gift. The loyalty of God in that gift, that God has been permanently loyal to us since we entered our lives on the planet. Oh, we just had a new grandbaby. Her name is Joelle June. Now, my son's a photographer by training, and he does these magical pictures that sends this most amazing face of vulnerability. And I think often after contemplating this expiration date on my body, that it's quite possible that the Spirit of God for me, and maybe for you, is just for little ones like Joelle. Maybe that's really the potential for divine wisdom. But let's keep going. So verses 4 and 5, so faith is sourced in God. The message didn't come to the Corinthians through a bunch of persuasive, smart, talented, oratorical speech that needs to be interpreted by another smart interpreter that's a human, that the Spirit of God speaks to something in us. Now, Ron and I've been talking about this, like, don't disclose too much, right? The illness is, for a doctor, is tough, especially one that is wired like I am, which has been wired around the ability to physically, in the physical sense, in the body sense, accomplish a lot of things. Climbing mountains, snow skiing, hiking distances, running. And so, to some extent, maybe a lot, that being removed, have been taken away, then leaves one, such as me, pretty darn vulnerable. And that requires quite a bit of honesty to myself, to my spouse, to my children, and then to my grandchildren. and then now to you, because you're my community. If that wasn't enough, I suppose there was this kind of one moment, one day, post-operatively, before I was out of the hospital, where I came real close, or I felt like I did. We call it a panic attack because that makes it seem less so. But came real close to seeing and experiencing closeness to God, where you would like, let's go to the other side. Let's just do that. So I want, my desire here is that your soul today would receive the Spirit of God, and then when you walk out the door, that you would hold your complexity lightly. That one of the things that I learned in exploring Paul's self-disclosure, that's what I looked at. When I looked at verse 3 and when I sent the email, I was like, Paul is an international leader of a movement. And he's 15, 16, 17 years experienced running around the Mediterranean to major provincial capitals and port cities, starting churches at the risk of his life, knowing full well that the empire is amiss. And in fact, not only was there an empire, but there was also a culture. And they weren't necessarily, they're two separate things. And the culture, one you would recognize fairly quickly. You'd probably recognize the empire too. Now, we're all dismayed that the empire came back. Like, oh my gosh, it actually came back. And I think that myth, the myth that we've lived in most of our adult life, is being deconstructed. At least it is for me. That somehow we as a culture had somehow transcended the need for the Holy Spirit. So there's two ways to look at what Paul's saying in verse 3, in my view. One is more traditional, which is Paul is potentially awed by the responsibility of starting a church in Corinth because of what Corinth represents, right? It is like if I can get a church there, they can spread the movement. Paul was from Tarsus, I think, is how you say it, and that's a similar port city, okay? So he's not unfamiliar with this notion of metropolitan type living and commerce. The rule of the culture of that day was classism, upper, middle, lower, and oppression. So the Romans didn't really learn much from the Greek philosophers, even though the Greek philosophers talked a lot about ideas about the way the human being is put together and can act. So I see Paul's letter as a love letter. And it's to his friends and his, maybe some of his family members, but I think he loves these people. And I think he feels compelled. He feels compelled to be on mission He cannot not be on mission. It's just got to be, it's just what he is. And I think sometimes that there's an overwhelming sense of gratitude because of his background, because of his history, from what he came from, the kind of way he used to think about people that weren't like him. He thought a kind of way. And for some reason, he got a special opportunity to come into a relationship with the living God. And out of that gratitude, he worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. So I put his work on a timeline in my mind, like 33 AD, and now he's writing a letter in 50 AD. No, 52, 53 AD, about the period of time, 50 AD, where he was in Corinth for 18 months or so. And so I know a little bit about leadership and having run a healthcare company, and I know that it's not really healthy for leaders to disclose vulnerabilities. And so I looked up this word, the Greek word for trembling, because, there's theologians in the room. I thought, well, just can't let it lay there. And so there is this kind of, it's tromos, means quaking, often used in the context of fear, or awe, or being, I love this part, or being seized with great respectful apprehension. Can you imagine that? That's pretty intense, right? Apprehension. I'm apprehensive when I get in front of you guys. I'm seized by it, right? I tremble on the inside. I was telling Rhonda, I can't settle myself down this morning. I tremble before I get for you. So it's an outward sign of an inward awe. Or fear. Or fear. So, facing surgery, a big surgery like I did, man, it scared the daylights out of me. And then laying on my back when I woke up and them telling me that I had a couple complications, like, yeah, I kind of knew that could happen. So how do you demonstrate your inward fear? Can be trembling on the inside and be visible to your neighbors. And they may actually come up, some of them courageous, come up and say, hey, are you okay? Right? The unfortunate part about chronic illness, as many of you know, is that there's not a day that goes by that you don't feel not okay. And so to some extent, I went from a period of, I had days where I was okay to where there's not days I'm okay anymore. The spine problems that I deal with in my lower back and my neck, now my neck is I'm losing functionality of things that I need to help me navigate the world. And it's challenging, right? It's challenging, and what's the biggest challenge for me is that I was a physician who really, my job, literally I saw myself as an internist, was to take people off medicine. When I saw patients, patients came to me, what I did a lot of is making sure that people could manage their life on the least amount of medicine. And then when I shifted over to taking care of poor people, the vast majority of my life was just saying, what one medicine can I get for you that will actually cover a lot? Because I couldn't cover everything. So I'm pretty conservative that way. So to find myself taking medicine in order to show up daily is a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow. That's good. Huh? All right. Back to
now.
yeah. So let's back to Paul. So Paul's love for his friends. He's writing this letter. He's writing it because he's living in this mess of the Roman Empire. And it's not just the politics. It's the Epicureanism. It's like, you know, what characterized that the most is this very large debate that had been going on for hundreds of years around whether or not the soul has immortality. And what you find, or what I found, was that whole conversation is something that I thought a lot about when I was sick. You don't go have major surgery unless you kind of think, hey, this is okay. I can be out there in the ether, you know, tomorrow or this afternoon. And that's a good way to think about it, I think. But Paul is writing this letter and he says, man, the people where I started this church, and these people are living in this space, and he says, I got to write a letter to these people. And my only sense is, he says, like, when I came to you, I was scared. I was weak, and I was trembling. And so we used the Holy, I said, the Spirit is what you need. Not me. Not all those yahoos. You need the Spirit. Well, that's what we need today. That's pretty simple. It's really clear to me. All this intelligence and all this social media stuff and all this conversation, that's not the Holy Spirit. I don't know what it is, but it's not where I find the Holy Spirit. So I'll break it down before anybody else leaves. I am aware of the Holy Spirit because of awe. Hard stop. And when that's not happening, I'm not there. And what I find is that's where the peace is. I find that when I evaluate my micro issues, you know, which is mortality, or the macro issues, which is politics and economics and what's going to happen for Joel and Kennedy and Carter. That's a spirit thing, man. All right. So there's two ways to think about it, right? So Paul's sense of responsibility is like, man, this is a big job. I've been doing this for 15 years, 17 years. I know the people. These are Roman, Greek, Jewish people living together in a community, and they are going to make a church. A church. You go on the website of Wilshire and read their history. There's a timeline. I did not do this, but I would have. I'd put a timeline because I like timelines. And I would put a curve though. And I would be transparent about the church, the community. Paul's writing to this community 2 years after it's established. In this case, and we were established in 51, it would have been in 53. Paul would have written a letter. I said, dear friends, you're in a culture. Your church is birthed in a culture, and that culture and the politics is impinging on the church. Trust the Spirit. Trust the Spirit. And what I found by looking at it and thinking about it in context of this lesson were signs, and I think there's a lot of people in the room that have been around the church for a long time, and know about this, of the Spirit of God moving in this community, this worshiping community, and it's on there. And I took some license, if you'll give me some license, okay? And I'm going to stand up for just a minute. All right. I want to get to this, but I just wanted to make a small point because everybody's still here. So the origin story is 1951, and it's a box, and it might be closed. There may be some story here that we don't want to revisit, so we're going to jump ahead. By about 57, there's this need, there's this moment the church goes, the leadership goes, man, I think we need to be desegregated. We need to be open to desegregation because that's a hot topic. You had Brown versus Board in 54, and then you had the Emmett Till murder, right? And so the nation is just quaking. I think it responds. The Spirit of God, I think. Then we have other gender leaders as deacons, I think. That's what I think that means. 2000, there's clergy, other clergy, women can be clergy. Other baptisms. Other sexual identity. Other senior pastor. And then this other idea of other residents, this commitment, 23 plus and counting, of financial investment in training the future. So I was left with the question, and over this period of time, why I have the arc going up is because that seems like signs that the community has more a sense of how to create emblematically justice. And the question for me was, the culture's changed around the church, not the community, I'm talking about the culture, the political culture. While we've been in it, I'm not sure Paul is suggesting that the Corinthian church is going to change the Roman Empire. Follow me? But it certainly can be light and salt, which is the idea, right? Is that that the light would penetrate the darkness. All right. So that's kind of the theme that I was working with. Now, I am a scientist, and I was trained as a physician, so this spiritual stuff is not natural for me. And however, what I learned taking care of the way I spent my career, that trying to create justice in healthcare in America meant the adoption of a whole person healthcare model. And what I realized is that most of our education models and most of the way our generation, I'm admitting, really heavily trained in this mind-body stuff. And the soul stuff, which is, in my estimation, is kind of what I believe is kind of a receiving piece of our body that connects to God and stays connected to God if we want to. If we choose to, we have a free will to stay connected. It's just an exercise of free will. And interestingly, that free will of connection from the soul to God gives us a pathway, a neurological pathway to connect all of that to our mind and our body. Okay? And I experienced that in my own body in the last 4 months. Now, it was pretty crazy stuff. Number one, to get close to dying, and then to be on this 4 months past that. And so I just say that out loud. It's like it's crazy. It's amazing stuff. And so we have what I'm trying to say is, like, we have the ability, all of us, in Epiphany, to lead, to testify to at least to our grandchildren. They're safe. Children, maybe not so much. But the grandchildren are open and ready. And they're interested in what Pops and y'all have to say about stuff. But that's going to take a little courage. I wanted to say this last thing, and I'm going to let you go, is that what I experienced was when this was separate, when I did not have this triangle applied to me, mind, body, spirit. I taught it, but I didn't apply it to myself until I got sick. I realized that an insult on my mind, my mental health, depression, anxiety, or my body, physical challenges, absolutely 100% introduces doubt. And I don't think that we get too far downstream in aging without that actually happening. And so the doubt, as I've realized, can erode confidence, spiritual confidence.
When you say doubt, you mean spiritual doubt?
Doubt.
Doubt in what?
Just doubt about like I got an expiration date, so you could start to doubt any number of items, right, about your physical abilities or whatever, but navigating the world, I don't know if I'm going to, okay. So doubt can lead to fear. This is a pathway. Fear can lead to weakness. And weakness obviously leads to trembling, like I feel now. I'm standing up. And in that trembling, there's, I think, once that trembling happens, we can have so much trembling is that we as people, as humans, lose empathy. We start looking in, start studying I call studying our belly buttons. And we start looking, because it's all about us, because we're trembling, we are trembling. And in that, we lose empathy, and that turns into this sense of othering. Okay, that's taken away, they're taking away something from me. So everything's about internal. And older people do this a ton. And the older they get, the worse it is. And so I'm just saying, we don't have to be that. We Epiphany don't have to be that way, because empathy is a representation of resolving this doubt that our mortal bodies are immortal, and that God has delivered loyalty as the mystery. The mystery is loyalty. That is God, for me, that God is showing up, and it's awesome. It's awe-inspiring if you just look for it, even in the midst of some of the challenges we have. Thank you.